Good evening to all. I am Muhammad Tariq, interns team of Biodiversity Conservation Foundation. BCF India is working on the conservation of wildlife and natural resources for more than 2 decades long. The sense of strategic planning based on holistic approaches connects our team with a common goal. BCF has started its contribution to nature conservation by integrating indigenous knowledge with our lifestyle, and our research team contributing various research activities from the Velia floods to the Point Calumet, and encouraging young generations to involve in the diversified field of study in the conservation aspects from marine ecology to cetology and exploring the diverse ecosystem across the country. BCF always focuses to conserve the diversity of various ecosystems through field-based research activities and awareness that would encourage proactive action for conservation of wildlife and wild habitats. We are strongly involving in educating young minds towards nature conservation and create awareness among people to live in harmony with nature. As the fact, we are in the road of conservation with a holistic approach to it, and this approach drove us to extend to the virtual platform and use it effectively to enable conservation and connect young generations and common people with internationally prominent scientists. BCF India is happy to celebrate this International Day of Forests with our Honorable Speaker Mr. Kunal Satyarthi IFS on the pioneer topic of natural resources management in India, the past and present. On behalf of BCF India, I am glad to welcome our Honorable Speaker and all participants to this international webinar. Now, I would like to invite one of our interns team member to introduce about today's speaker. Thanks for joining us.
It's a great honor for me to welcome you all on the behalf of Biodiversity Conservation Foundation to today's international webinar on Natural Resource Management in India, the past and present. Here with us we have Mr. Kunal Satyarthi sir, a principal of CAS FOS, Ministry of Environmental, Forest and Climate Change in Government of India. As the principal of Central Academy, he has introduced new courses to the uniform staff, faculties, publics and stakeholders. He started as the member of Premium Indian Forest Service of 1997 batch of Himachal Pradesh Kartil. He has also served in field of imparting training on forest laws and environmental policy for more than 20 years. Mr. Kunal sir is an MPhil in Botany graduate from the University of Delhi and has pursued Masters in Public Policy from an Australian National University. His international works include Management of Rivers and Lakes in Japan, Sustainability Forestry and Wood Industry at Munich, Germany, Developing Economic Opportunities and Econ Tourism in Italy, Capacity Building of State Forest Training Institute at Japan, Schools of Forestry and Environmental Studies at Nuance, USA, Wildlife Management and Conservation in the University of Bangkok, Thailand. Furthermore, his works also include as Deputy Director of Great Himalayan National Park, Kulu, Himachal Pradesh, and as Division Forest Officer of Kinnar, Kulur, and Mandi, where he picked up the art of practical field experience in dealing with natural resource management. The Himalayan field posting has been in high biotic and development pressure scenarios. Moreover, he also has assisted in dealing with human-wildlife conflicts, implementing sustainable livelihood projects, tackling protection and regulation issues. Last but not least, his posting in Research Institute at Dehradun as head of the Civil Culture Division has contributed to his research experience. His works in Biodiversity Board include Climate Change Center, Space Application Center, State Wetland Development Authority, Patent Center, and in Science for Popularization in Himachal Pradesh. He is truly an inspiration to all of us. I hope all of you have a wonderful and enlightening time with us during this session. Over to you, sir.
Okay, so thank you so much, and thank you, Varsha, for that elaborate introduction, which I don't deserve, and thanks to Kumar Guru Saab for giving this opportunity to interact with a lot of people, and thanks for giving this. Thanks for having this confidence that I'll be able to do this job, and what I'll be doing is I'll be trying to share as to what I think is forest management or wildlife management, environment management in the country. And this has nothing to do with the official position that I hold, and that I always, like a disclaimer in a movie, I start with that because this would be a lot of critical thoughts about what has gone right or wrong with forest management, what has gone wrong or right with wildlife management and environment management in the country, and biodiversity conservation in the country. And they would all be my personal thoughts as a citizen of this country and also belonging to the Indian Forest Service, nothing to do with the posting I'm doing in the Ministry of Environment, Forest and Climate Change. I welcome all the participants, almost 130 of them are online, and on a Sunday afternoon, on a lazy Sunday afternoon, to talk to people and see so many people on board. My probationer, my main job currently is to train the Forest Service officers of the State Forest Service and also the other academies. But it is very difficult to run an afternoon session, that too on a Sunday. So when I was coming from my home to the office, I thought it is more official. So let's go to the office and do this, because we have other functions also today lined up for the International Day for Forest. Then my daughter was saying, why are you going to the office all on a Sunday at 3 o'clock? So I see a lot of people. So I think I should make some sense to all of you. And this would be my thoughts. I don't know as to what the audience looks like, or what they are by profession or by academic qualification or by the expectation. So normally we know the client. When I do training, I call the client. So you should know the client. This is an unknown world. You know, some K and B and M. They're all coming on my screen. Some people have a video on, but otherwise it's all coded. All coded sequence of people. So it's like talking to aliens. But that is a blunder that we are doing in the online phenomena, and that is what I'll continue doing. So this is what the topic Kumar Guru Sahab has given me from the Biodiversity Conservation Foundation. I have cross-checked, and he is doing amazing work, and his predecessors have done great work in this organization that they built up over a period of time. We have this habit in the government to cross-check, and I found out that you have done amazing work in Satyamangalam from my batchmate Ramasubramaniam in Tamil Nadu, and other batchmates, and they praised this organization a lot. And then that is the reason I told that I'll take some time to confirm. But you are doing amazing work. Keep that work going on, and thanks for this invitation. I'll be talking about the topic of natural resources management in India, and past and present. So I'll take you through a journey of what has happened in this country, and over a period of time, what has happened, and particularly what has happened in the last century, and what I look forward to, and what looks to me as a possible scenario of sustainable development or natural resource management in this country. So that is what I'll be talking about. To begin with, I think wishes to all of you who have joined today for this webinar on the International Day of Forest. And since I belong to the Indian Forest Service, which is a premier service trying to manage the forest, wildlife, birds, faunas, and flora of the country, and also the environment sector, it is my duty to wish you all on this International Day of Forest, which is 21st of March. And I was looking at the topic, and the topic was drawing my attention for since morning, during the morning walk, forest restoration, And I like the word because I'm more into forest law and environmental law and wildlife law. I love playing with words, and the word that catched my attention is a path to recovery and well-being. And I was wondering, and I was questioning as to whose recovery are we worried about? The recovery of all these species that have already gone extinct, the recovery of the endangered, critically endangered flora and fauna, the recovery of all the rivers and lakes that have gone dead, or whose well-being are we talking about? And why are we so worried on this day that we are celebrating on this Sunday? So I was, you need to restore forest. That is the theme of this year's International Day of Forest. But the addition is very critical. Path, you need to find out a path to do some recovery and do some well-being. And I was wondering, are we so worried about the recovery of all the birds or plants or animals that we saw very happily during the lockdown period, and everybody was posting pictures of recovery of nature, birds are coming into the city of Bangalore or Pune and so on and so forth. I recorded 3 species of birds first time in the Forest Research Institute campus in Dehradun. So are we worried about recovery of all those flora and fauna species, or the recovery of all the natural resources that we have used or exploited, or have not been worried about for so many years, so many decades or so many centuries? And whose well-being are we worried about? Had it been an offline class, I normally would have asked you as to please answer as to whose recovery are we worried about and whose well-being are we worried about. And I'm sure from this picture that we are worried about us. And so that is the answer. We are worried about the recovery or well-being of human beings. So it's not a very generous species that we are dealing with, or us, or me, and all of you attending this webinar. We are dealing with us, and we are worried about our own supremacy in the ecosystem, our own survival. So we are trying to, all these themes, I have been watching the themes of all the days that have gone or are coming, including the one coming tomorrow, the World Water Day. And all of them are so concerned about one small fragment of RNA originating in a market in China, and has been troubling the supremacy of a human species that has the largest number of and the most effective chromosome and the biggest brain in the world. So we should be sure that we are worrying about our recovery and our own well-being. And for well-being and recovery of Homo sapiens, I think we are trying to sustain everything called clean air, tomorrow clean water, food, and then there would be a biodiversity day on 22nd of May. We will be worried about us through the biodiversity. So this is my initial critical remark on this theme, and that is what should be very sure. It is not a very philanthropic or a generous species that is worried about the survival of all the other species. Just because our own survival is at stake, are we so concerned about all the other, including the sparrow yesterday and the water tomorrow. 3 days, and I was looking at these 3 days falling one after the other. And yesterday was the World Sparrow Day. Today is the International Day for Forests, and tomorrow we would be celebrating the World Water Day, and the theme is valuing water. And all three, I was trying to trace the origin, and I always do this stuff as to when was these days started. All of them started in 2010, 12. World Sparrow Day 2010, International Day for Forests in the UN General Assembly in 2012, and World Water Day in 2012. So they've all originated in a particular year. And when I tell you the story of evolution of natural resource management across the world, or particularly in India, because my topic restricts me to India, I'll be telling you why these years have become so important and how we have reacted to the problems that we have created for ourselves. So that is what I'll be taking through the journey today. This is a classical slide to start with on a topic of forestry. This is the forest map of the country. And for all the audience, I'll just point out that there are only 4 great patches. One is called the Central Patch, which is the Madhya Pradesh, Maharashtra, Chhattisgarh, and Odisha tri-junction, or 4 junctions, and which has the largest number of tiger reserves. If you heard about Kanha, or Bandhavgarh, or Pench, or Panna, or Simlipal, they all belong in this portion. This central portion is a large chunk of forest land. The other chunk is in the Northeast India, which is all the 7 sisters of the Northeast India. The other chunk is in the Western Himalayas, Uttarakhand, Himachal Pradesh, and southern Jammu and Kashmir. And the place where most of you are sitting in is the Eastern and the Western Ghats, predominantly the Western Ghats, large chunk of land. Now, if you look at this map, I love to speak about only on this slide for hours together, because this slide shows me a lot of data, from a forester perspective. This country, this country, you look at the globe on the right side, this is the world atlas. And India is just a small speck, 2.4% of the land mass of the world. The red portion is India. And it's a small land mass, and we are so concerned, and we presume that we are so big. It's a small land mass, 2.4% total geographical area of the world. If the globe has 200, India has only 2.4. But the blessing is you have almost 17% human population of the world, 18% livestock, cattle population of the world. And still, this country maintains around 21% land under forest cover. I'll not go into more of data. I love concepts more. But please remember this figure. And this is a huge amount of biotic pressure that we exert on 2.4% land. And out of 2.4% land mass of the world, 21% we maintain in those 4 pockets that I was showing you in the earlier map. And we have been blessed. 8% of the world's biodiversity is found in this country on 2.4%. So 4 times the blessing. If it is raw mathematics, we have been blessed 4 times. So much variability of climate, environment, biodiversity, 3 hotspots. Now it is 4. So 4 hotspots. Nicobar Island has been added as a hotspot apart from the Eastern Himalayas, West Himalayas, and the Western Ghats. Now Nicobar, which is called the Sunda land, has been added now. So there are now 36 hotspots in the world, and 4 of them lie in India. And we have 2967 tigers. If you're so worried about tigers, 2967 tigers in the country, which is like the largest tiger holding population country in the world, which is like 30% of the tiger of the world. And that is a lot of mathematics to do. But remember that we have 50 tiger reserves, which is 5% of the land mass, which is high. So if you come back to this map, I'll spend some time on this map to lay the story right before going on to managerial aspects. 2.4% is what you're seeing in the map of India. In this 2.4%, what green you are seeing is 21%, which is forest. In 21% of this land, there are 4 pockets, Western Ghats in the left and the central portion. Central portion has the largest amount of tigers, largest number of tigers, largest amount of biodiversity, apart from the Northeast India and the Western Ghats. They have the large amount of biodiversity, the largest number of tiger reserves. If I go on, they also have the largest amount of iron ore and coal ore reserves in the world. So you need to dig all this forest to take out coal and iron to make the beautiful city of Bangalore or Pune or Coimbatore or Chennai, because you require iron rods and cement. For that, you'll have to destroy the central portion of India predominantly. God has been unfair also, has given a lot of blessing, but has been unfair because he has put all the iron ore mines and the coal mines below this green area. And therefore the conflict, and therefore the issue of sustainable development and what has gone right or wrong with forest management in this country. And Northeast India, this also the central, if I confine more to the central portion, this also has the highest tiger, tribal population of the world. So I always call it a conflict between tigers and tribals. At times it is portrayed like that, tribals versus tigers, and happens in the central portion. So 5%, if you say this, all of them are 5 each, 21%. So 5% takes care of all the iron ore, most of the tigers, most of the tribals, most of the Naxalism problem in the country, extremism problem in the country, most of the lowest human development index in the country. So all the parameters fit into this problem and make the job of forest management or natural resource management extremely disturbing or extremely difficult to do. So this is what I thought. The Northeast also has their own issues of extremism. J&K also has, except for Himachal and Uttarakhand and the Western Ghats. And Western Ghats has its own problems of coffee and tea and pepper and elephant. And this trijunction here of Bandipur, Nagarhole and the national parks is very important to understand. So this understanding is so critical for the audience who are attending this session before I go into the management perspective about how it has gone right or wrong. So who manages this? This is a picture I took recently. I did a lot of hiking and trekking during the lockdown period because I had nothing else to do. So I used to do a lot of hiking in the Himalayas and nearby Mussoorie mountains. And this is one of my forest guards. And I took this picture and thought, this is what forest management looks to me. This is one forest guard. And I was asking him standing on that cliff, how much is your area? And he told, Jahan tak dikhta hai, I'm sorry for using a bit of Hindi, but till the place beyond the clouds where eyes can go is my beat. And I am the forest manager for this beat. So one forest guard has an area of around 25 to 50 to even more square kilometers to man alone with a stick on his back. You will also be given weapons if you are in some disturbed area. But this classically is what forest management looks like. And this is what I'll be talking about as to how he manages. And not officers like me, but this foot soldier is so critical for wildlife management or forest management or water management or air management in this country. This guy is so critical. And he's the most critical guy because he needs to walk to the nearest village and get the villagers on board, go to the best NGO possible, go to the best scientific community possible and get all the inputs and try to manage this 50 square kilometer area that he holds so proudly and tries to manage that. And he needs to have all the support of the civil society. So that is the initial, just setting the tone of what I'm going to talk about. I'll bore you with the past, but past is so important. Past is so important to realize what we have done till now and what this country had looked like. And I'll certainly take you to the present also. I'll show you with my limited understanding about the sector, with my limited understanding of last 20 years of working in the sector, basically in the Himalayas, in the mountains. But I have seen villages and I know what the pressures are like. So if you look at past, the earliest, apart from the Vedas of Atharva Veda, and I can go to the Samhitas and Vedas also, and the Upanishads, where there's a lot of documentation about medicine plants and so on and so forth. But I'm not going so far back into Rig Veda, but it is quite similar. 250 BC, when people were living in caves across the world, we were having the best, one of the best and biggest empires. Apart from the three small empires in the southern India, the Mauryan Empire used to hold Afghanistan and Pakistan both. I'm bringing this slide with intention because this is the first empire that classically used elephants for war. So they appointed forest officers, wildlife officers, elephant officers, and they were supposed to be managing and the designated forest areas which had a lot of elephants, which are now called Buxa Tiger Reserve or Rajaji National Park, were all elephant reserves of the kings. So they were appointing forest officers. They started managing forests for growing more elephant, if I can use the word growing, or breeding more elephants. But this is when I find the origin of forestry in this country, apart from the great Rishi Munis who were working a lot on medicinal plants and doing all the surgical operations that they were doing. Beyond that, I'll straight away jump for almost like, since you will have your kings of Travancore and the other kingdoms of Cholas and Chalukyas and the Pandyas and the other dynasties in southern India, below Narmada, and above also. That was very similar. If you go to Jodhpur, Jaipur, you'll find such paintings on the palaces and forts in the palaces and forts of the kings. And predominantly showing that wildlife poaching, or if you call the word poaching now, hunting. Hunting was a royalty. Hunting was, and a lot of the. I always say, I have not had the blessing of working in a tiger reserve because I work in the mountains where I don't have any tigers. But if you look at the tiger reserves of the country, half of them belong to the earlier princely states who manage them as game reserves, who used to come there for, whether it is Kabini in Bangalore, near Bangalore, or the other tiger reserves, or Periyar, or the other KMTR. They were all hunting reserves or game reserves of the local princely kings and fiefdoms. While this legacy also continued with the Britishers. So when Britishers came, they were also very fond of, because they had already destroyed everything. I'm sorry if somebody is attending from United Kingdom, all the forests were almost razed to ground because they used to make the best ships in the world and the best railway lines in the world and best aeroplanes in the world of various timbers that I'll talk about a bit later. So hunting was so important. And this also shows that wildlife was in preponderance in this country. Wildlife was preponderant, forest was in large extent, population was limited, and it was a passion for the kings and even the British Empire to do a lot of hunting, which continues as a legacy in some portions even today. And you've heard about the Salman Khan case and the other cases that have become very famous, in the Pataudi case of killing of a blackback or a deer. So this continued till 1800. So I'm jumping a lot of years, but that is by design because I have limited time to tell you my part of the story. Very interesting. I'll stop here in 1730, which a lot of people don't know about, which I discovered a few years back, and I have been talking about this story a lot nowadays. Is a story of a village near Jodhpur. If you've gone to the Jodhpur fort in Rajasthan, Western India, there's a fort in Jodhpur, and the king ordered that they have to bring 300 or 400 trees of Prosopis, Cineraria, and Juliflora to make the palace, of the king. And they went to the village, and there was a lady called Amrita Devi who stood and who is personified in this painting as a lady standing near the tree. And she hugged the tree and told, "You'll have to cut my neck first before cutting a tree." This is not a folklore. This is not a myth. This is recorded in the history of and gazetteer of Jodhpur kingdom. So she laid down the life, and 323 was the last count. People were killed because the king did not like somebody to betray the authority of the king. And so many ladies, most of them ladies, were killed. And thereafter the king told, "Let us not cut Prosopis, Juliflora, and Cineraria anymore." And that is so important to lay the seed of what I see in Salman Khan case today. When the Bishnoi community in Rajasthan predominantly, and also in state of Gujarat, people don't do much poaching or kill animals. It is predominantly coming from this long history of forest conservation set by example by villagers, not by the forest department, so or the civil society now. So this year is so important. This date is also recorded in the gazetteer, and almost 300 people died over one day. And the king had to retort back and told, Then the king became very pro-conservation and very pro-protection. Small story, just to give you a flair about what is happening historically. 1947 and before, I'll come to the British Kingdom and come to the Forest Department straight away, and the Indian Forest Service that I belong to. And this gentleman on the right, which you can see now, is called Dietrich Brandis. Dietrich Brandis is a German, as you can understand by the name. So he started the forest department in this country. He was a German, and Britain and Germany were at war all the time. But Britain had no idea about forestry, and they had to appoint 3 IG Forest from Germany. The first 3 were Germans to run the forestry operations in this country. So 1864 is when the Forest Department was established. And if you go back to the NCERT books of 10th and 12th or your history books, you would have learned that the railway lines were also developed during the same time. So when I talk to railway officers, railway traffic service officers, I say we both have similar origin. You know, we started forestry in this country to supply sal trees. Sal is a Shoria robusta tree slipper to 4 railways because of the longest fiber. So the rails can be kept intact. They will not go away from each other. And for teak. So these were the 2 species that predominantly drew the attention of British forest officers for a pretty long time. Teak, teak, including the Nilambur teak and the CPT of Maharashtra and other portions. So teak was for shipbuilding, sal was for railways, and if you go to the mountains, if there are people participating from the mountains, you had Abies pindro and Picea spithena, foreign spruce grown for building light aeroplanes. So he was the first IG forest imported from Burma, Myanmar. He was working in Myanmar. He was overnight put and brought here in 1864. And he came with the first Indian Forest Act of 1865. I'll not go into the acts today. I have taken a vow not to talk about forest laws today. 1869, Forest Department was established. If you have met anybody from the Forest Department, all these names came into origin in 1869. So I owe my origin to 1869. Conservator of Forest, Deputy Conservator of Forest, Assistant Conservator of Forest, Range Forest Officers, all these terms were coined by him in 1869. And he went back, old man, settled back in Berlin, and also teaching in the Munich University of München, as they call in German. And he, the first class he took, one of the students was Mr. Alfred Pinchot, who went back and became the first IG Forest of the United States of America. And therefore, in America, you have the same terms. When if there is a forest fire or a wildlife problem in America, you will have rangers and divisional forest officer, because he was the student of Dietrich Brandis. Anyway, I can tell you a lot of stories about this kind of, but I'll curtail a bit. A note was circulated by Brandis in 1874. This note is so critical, and not many people have read this note. In this note, he's trying to figure out with the forest officer then appointed 5 years after the appointments, trying to say whether they should have a monopoly of government over the forest of this country, or we should give all the forest to the local people and they would run and we'll just give the technical know-how, or we can have a middle path like Buddha and say we'll keep some for natural parks and sanctuaries and give most to the local communities and people. Very important note, which everybody should read, the 1874 Forest Officers Conference. And in this conference, as per the proceeding, they decided that in this country, we'll have to have complete government control over forest, right? And therefore, in this country, you have more than 95% land owned by the Department of Forest, which is unlike the countries they were coming from. I've been to Germany, lived there for many months. And in Germany, 90% of the land, forest land, is owned by local people. And government owns only some of the wildlife sanctuaries and national parks. So you'll find that this difference is so important to understand. And when I take on the journey, and if you go to the northeast, a lot of forest is owned by the community. Particularly if you go to Meghalaya and Mizoram, a lot of it is owned by the community, and there are various mechanisms to protect the forest and so on and so forth. Okay, so this act was revised in 1878. As my vow goes, I'll not go into the acts. Now, I'll just look at this and then come back to that picture. 1870 to 1910, the Britishers went around this country, no roads, not many roads, not any railway lines, on the horseback or muleback or on the feet. They went around across the country, and wherever you're coming from, all the participants, except the people participating from abroad, if you go to a forest, you'll have a name of the forest and a boundary pillar and a boundary of the forest. And now it is all being digitized. And that happened during these 40 years. It is called a silent phase in law, but a very important phase in the field. A lot of them lost their lives to cholera and malaria and tuberculosis in this country, in the interiors. I've seen almost 13, 14 graves of people lying, almost unknown, of people who died from cholera and malaria going on. So they also settled the rights of people. So they were not very, they would also call them and tell what rights you have in this forest. I have rights of medicine plant, of fodder or fuel wood. So that would be settled. and that would be accepted in the reports. But state monopoly over forest was established during this time. State would be the owner of forest. Forests were divided into reserve forest and protected forest. If you want to know the difference between them, again go into law. But in one line, if easily I can make you understand. In reserve forest, nothing is allowed, nothing at all is allowed except what is allowed. So there is a very small list of things that are allowed in a reserve forest. While if you look at a protected forest, everything is allowed. Everything is allowed except a small list of things that are not allowed. So if that's very difficult to understand when I speak in one sentence. But RF is more for conservation, and protected forest is more for local people. And that is a very good way to distinguish in the Act. And that is what is the distinction between a national park and a wildlife sanctuary. If at the end of the presentation you want to ask me what is the difference between a national park and a wildlife sanctuary, the same difference. In national park or a tiger reserve, nothing is allowed except a very small list of things like right of way would be allowed, right of water would be allowed. Rest everything would not be allowed, not even felling, not even medicine plant, not even digging. While in protected forest, villages would be present and everything would be allowed, but they would say felling of trees not allowed. So that is an important thing to understand. You have working plans across the country made during this time, and scientific management of forest started during this time, 40 years, very important. Now going back to this slide that I borrowed from an Australian professor with whom I used to have a lot of argument in 2014 about what has gone right or wrong with forest management in this country. So he showed me this slide. This is Australian slide, not my slide. So an Australian judge, is trying to talk to Aboriginals, as they call them in Australia, and they call them Maoris in New Zealand and First Nation in Canada. So you have that. So this is a judge saying, how about a compromise with the tribal? We can keep the land, the mineral rights, the natural resources, and the fishing rights, and the timber rights. That's all we'll keep. And we will acknowledge you, all of you, all the Aboriginal community, all the tribal community, as the traditional owners of this thing. And they had this phenomenon. The Aboriginal community in Australia is one of the oldest community in the world. 60,000 years. They've been living on that piece of island. And suddenly the Britishers went, Captain Cook went in the ship with a lot of small petty thieves and went to landed in Botany Bay below Sydney and established the whole colony. And till 1990s, there was a principle of nulla voida. There was nothing here. Nobody existed on this land till almost 1994 when the federal court finally told no, people were there here before we arrived. So have we also done similar thing under the same kind of British rule to our tribals is an important question that we need to answer if we actually want to do co-management of forests. So this is my very personal understanding, very personal take on this slide, but this is what is called the Forest Rights Act and what is happening to historical injustice that has been done to the tribals. Anyway, having said that, 1894, he was supposed to be going back to Germany. So first national forest policy was put up in 1894. And this policy says agriculture development on forest land would be given the first priority. Forest would be state property. The first Indian Forest Act came up in 1927. This is the Forest Act that we implement today also. This is the act, it's called new, but it is still being implemented. We had a draft in 2009 circulated, but has been temporarily taken down, might be available later. In 1947 to 50, 3 years in Indian Constitution, if you know law, is a very important thing because this is the time when we did not have a constitution and we had independence. We had independence, but no constitution. So the Constituent Assembly was discussing a lot of things, drafting the Constitution of India. A lot of acts were also taken out during this time, and they're called the original acts of the Government of India because there was no constitution to draft the act. So there was, I tried to find out whether there was any discussion in the Constituent Assembly about forest environment. So there were very, very few amendments brought about, particularly by a gentleman called Professor K.T. Shah, who was very concerned about forestry and environment. There are some acts passed during this time which show a flair of environment conservation, but not much. I'll not go into details because in the Constitution, we were totally silent with the word forest environment till 1976. So this story I'll keep on continuing. But there was a gentleman, Professor K.T. Shah, who brought this in the Constituent Assembly. And forest and wildlife was in abundance, and revenue source and industry was important. We just got independence, and the tryst with modern India, when the whole world sleeps, and the speech at midnight, which our honorable Prime Minister gave. Those are the days, new country having been born, and everything can be sacrificed for development. You stand on Bhakra Nangal Dam and say that these are the temples of modern India kind of era, if you're thinking about. Just got independence after a long freedom struggle. No linkage to water, air, and soil for natural resources. Forest was disconnected. Wildlife was more like glamorous poaching and hunting. Forest was source of revenue. Wildlife was tiger hunting. Water, air, and soil was in plenty. So there was no linkage as such established in the constitution or even across the world. Across the world also, this phenomena has happened much later. Okay, so you had the National Festival of Tree Planting, as we call in the Northern Belt as Van Mahotsava, started in 1950. Merger of princely states, abolition of zamindari or rayatwari in the country. The new country born, we had the second national forest policy. This is called the revised national forest policy. And this forest policy told commercial management of forest for industrial raw material would be very important. And forest would be sacrificed for industries. National interest would take over local interest in forestry. So important. That is in brief. You can read the whole document, but that is what the pith and substance of this policy is like. So that is important to realize. And this is what foresters did for the next 20 years. So I call it a legally silent phase. These elephants trying to manage the timber, take out the timber. So this is a very critical time in Indian history from all perspectives. If you look at socioeconomics, this is a very critical phase. Population is expanded dramatically from 1952 to 72, almost in 92. I'm stopping at 72 because Stockholm Conference happened at 72. And I'd like to carry the journey on because 72 Stockholm Conference gave a lot of impetus to forest and wildlife conservation in this country. So population explosion, forest working was rampant, forest corporations were working, it was all sustainable, supposedly sustainable. The forest department became timber-centric. Timber was the main thing to be grown in a forest. Anything else was a weed. Monoculture continued of teak, deodar, and sal. Wildlife loss started happening. Population is growing, wildlife loss is starting, forest cover depletion is happening at a fast rate. Weeds, you heard about the Parthenium weed and the Lantana weed being imported just after this during the emergency time. Weeds infestation happened. We tried with a lot of exotics. Eucalyptus came during British time in Nilgiris, but a lot of exotics came into this country to name Rauwolfia, and I'll not bore with people who are not from botany background, but people also became detached with forestry. This forest belongs to whom? It belongs to the forest department. This leopard belongs to him. This elephant in the picture belongs to whom? It belongs to the forest department. It doesn't belong to me. Was also important phenomena. So sense of belongingness, which is so crucial to run a particular sector, if you belong to a private sector, went missing, in this 20 years of working. I could have had a longest time. I would have talked more about this phase, but I have to move on. So suddenly the world rises to this problem, that there's a problem across the world, and hosts a conference called the UN Conference on Human Environment. Now look at this. This is what I draw. This word, UN Conference on Human Environment, gives me a flair of the theme of this year's International Forestry Day, because well-being is so critical. And whose well-being? Human environment is so critical. So Stockholm Conference title is so critical to understand what was happening. Birth of global environmental consciousness, first human being landing on moon happening in the same years. Then you have the book called Silent Spring, written during the same years, and leading to realization in the world that there's a problem with the environment. And there were only two heads of state. I have kept telling this story many times. Olof Palme is receiving the Indian Prime Minister Indira Gandhi at Stockholm, and she was the only head of state who attended this conference. And that is the kind of impetus she gave to the scenario of environment to reduce poverty. Or states shall endeavor to bring in literacy, and so on and so forth. So there are aspirations of the state, which they will try to fulfill through policies and acts, but they might fail to fulfill. And you can't take the state to the court saying that you've not met your directive principle. Fundamental duties are very important. It was not in the fundamental rights, but the Supreme Court of India, Honorable Supreme Court of India, and the High Courts, with so many judgments, have almost equated right to clean environment under Article 21 and 19 of the Constitution of India, saying that right to wholesome environment is within the right to life. I can't enjoy a right to life as a citizen of this country if I don't have a clean environment. So it started in the city of Dehradun, where I'm based. It was a case called the Dehradun Quarrying case. Mussoorie mountains were being degraded for limestone mining. Okay, 1976, one thing I forgot, there's no Ministry of Environment, Forest and Climate Change till now in this history. And there's only a Department of Forest within the Ministry of Agriculture. So in 1976, the National Commission on Agriculture was set up, and they first time, as it happens in the government, tried to make a report and try to document the problem of forestry in the country. And they've given very good recommendations, saying that forests are under pressure with extraction, with local requirements of fuel wood and firewood, with all the requirements of people, all the requirements of industry, and we need to take forest outside the forest. That is what the report says. And therefore, you have origin of words called social forestry and agroforestry, and a lot of externally added projects started. EAPs, basically all the projects started during this time. Forest department expanded. You had DFO social forestry, and recruitments into the forest service became almost 4 times. This happened because of this report, and a lot of plantations happened. And if your satellite catches today figures of rising plantations, rising forest cover in the country, they all owe to the plantations raised after 1976. Large scale plantations happened. The 1980, there is a Forest Conservation Act that came up. So if you're not aware about law, this act says that no state government, the state government of Tamil Nadu, cannot use forest land by themselves. They will have to take the prior approval of the government of India. And nobody can use forest land for non-forestry purposes without the prior approval of the government of India. That is what the act says. Very small acts, only 8 sections, one of the smallest acts in the Indian statutory regime. Taking you further on this journey, 25th March 1974, bringing you to the mountains now, to the Himalayas where I'm located. 3 gentlemen on the picture on the top, Sundarlal Bahuguna on the rightmost, and Gaura Devi in the center, and left is Chandi Prakash Bhatt. All of them, I have had the chance to meet all of them recently, but they all become very old now. They started a movement, which if you've not heard about it, it's called the Chipko movement. So forest contractors went to the mountains and told we have the legal sanction to cut the trees, earn the revenue, put the trees in the rivers, flow the timber down to cities of Yamunanagar and Haldwani, or the Katgodam, as the name suggests. Katgodam means timber depot, and Yamunanagar was set up totally for bringing timber from in the Yamuna river. And these ladies had the guts in 1974 to stick around to trees and said, you will not have to, almost like Amrita Devi reincarnations, in the mountains, saying that you will not have to, you will not be allowed to take the trees. This came to known as the Chipko movement, one of the most celebrated movements of civil society-driven movement for forest conservation across the world. So this was very important. The lower picture of is a very recent picture when they have all become old now, but this was a picture of all the survivors of Chipko movement taken very recently, a few years back. So 1970s is a learning that industrial forestry and biotic procedure of humans is leading to forest degradation. And also a learning that village communities are not an obstacle to forest management, but they are partners. And I'll tell you by a lot of examples. Chipko movement is one that I just talked about. Arabari, if you're coming from West Bengal, or if you know about history of JFM, Joint Forest Management, Arabari was very interesting. One of the forest officer, Mr. Banerjee, started the Joint Forest Management model for Sal regeneration. Jharkhand, there was agitation by tribals, and a lot of forest officers were killed by bow and arrow because forest officers were obsessed with planting teak in Sal areas. And the tribals told, we will not allow you to plant this lousy tree with such a huge leaf and which becomes dry, and we don't know this tree and we don't want this tree in our forest area. They took arms, and not much known about this movement, but very important movement, and we lost a lot of forest officers to this. Sukho Majri in Haryana, if you're participating, if you live in the beautiful city of Chandigarh, Sukhna Lake was almost silted to death when Chandigarh was being set up. And one gentleman, Mr. Mishra, went ahead from the Center for Soil Water Conservation Training Institute and established the relationship between forest, water, and silt. And if the Sukhna Lake is alive today, it is owing to this model. And this model proved that forest is linked to water, it is linked to soil, and this can be done by forest department or the scientific community or the NGOs only in collaboration with the local people. So this is very important. So a lot of things are happening in international phenomena, a lot of things are happening in the legal phenomena, a lot of things are happening on the ground also. So this is what draws my attention in the 80s. 70s, if it is an era of wildlife conservation and forest conservation and people's participation in forest conservation, I think 80s is the era of environment conservation because of this incident that happened. So if you're a younger generation born in recent times, you will not remember this left picture, but this symbolized the Bhopal gas tragedy. This gas of methyl isocyanate leaking from the factory, 30 tons of the gas, and everybody dying almost in the sleep at midnight, 3rd December 1984, is a very important, very huge human error, one of the largest environmental losses of human lives, apart from Chernobyl disaster of the nuclear reactor. But this set to motion in the Indian scenario a phenomena of environmental conservation and environmental policies and environmental acts. And this is what I'll talk about for the next decade onwards. So post Bhopal, this is pre-Bhopal, these three things, a lot of institutions were born. Forest Survey of India, Wildlife Institute of India, and Indian Institute of Forest Management were born in this time, 81 and 82. The place I am working in, Forest Research Institute, and the Central Academy were born much earlier. But the Bhopal tragedy set to motion of important phenomena. 85 is the birth of the Ministry of Environment, Forest and Climate Change, which is now called climate change also. So environment suddenly became very important. The most powerful act available across the world, I've seen in my term paper in Australia during my course in Master Policy in Environment, I did a paper on 16 countries' Environment Act. Our country's Environment Act is one of the most powerful environment acts in the world. And rightly, one of the judges has told, this is act looks like we are going to war. One of the judges, I'll not name him, in a court judgment has told that this sounds like a war cry, this act. So this is a very powerful act. So if you buy a 5-star air conditioner or you drive 3-star car, it is because of this act. And because this act enables the government to do a lot of things without going to the parliament all the time. So it's a very enabling act. And a lot of Water Act and Air Act was also amended in 86. 88 is the era of starting of green judiciary in this country. If you heard about Mr. M.C. Mehta, who lives in the same city, who I have met recently, a number of times, we had a lot of discussions, very learned fellow. He went to the court and told Taj Mahal is becoming yellow, if you know about those era of environmental consciousness. And had the courage, he was the only environmental lawyer those days in Delhi or in the country maybe, who stood in that court and told Taj Mahal is becoming yellow, and the linkage with tannery industry or the chemical industry of Agra and Kanpur. So that started a movement of judiciary becoming green, and they enforcing legal rights over environment for the citizens of the country. Very important. 88, Dehradun case, and I can keep on quoting a lot of cases. So 88 is when the government of India reacted, the government of this country reacted with the third national forest policy, learning from whatever is happening in the decade of 70s and 80s. And third national forest policy says you will have to do, you'll have to involve local people in management, and local people will have the first claim on forest and not an industrial house or somebody else sitting in an urban setup. So local people will have the first claim on forest. 1990 is the launch of joint forest management in the country, formally by a notification by the Ministry of Environment, Forest and Climate Change. So this journey is so important to understand. I'll take you further also. But if you understand this, I think you understand the genesis of forest management and the onset of this laws. 1992, similar time, 85 we have the environment, 86 we have the Environment Protection Act, new forest policy, 1990 JFM program, Bhopal gas tragedy happened in 1984. World sits back again, and this time there is more than 100 head of state who are attending. So 72 is Stockholm Conference, 92 is Rio Conference, as we call it, or the Earth Summit, as people normally call it. Lasted from 3rd to 14th of June. Luckily, I have had the chance to go to all these conventions of biodiversity and climate change in the last 3 years. So this was called the United Nations Conference on Environment and Development. So look at the change of tenor. That is called human environment. And now we are back to human environment in this day of International Forestry Day we are celebrating today. But all the conventions that you know about, the learned audience knows about the Convention on Biological Diversity, the Convention on Climate Change, Convention on combating desertification, on Convention on migratory species, and so on and so forth. All of them lay the origin in the Rio Conference, the beautiful city of Rio, where this happened. So the world realized, and it was time to start doing something. And every year there's a conference of parties, as we call it, COP13 and COP14 and so on and so forth. And world has gone ahead. Particularly if you look at ozone hole depletion, or you look at the problem of acid rain, they have been rectified by the world community sitting together. Climate change is taking its toll because biodiversity is taking a toll, because a lot of countries have not signed. USA has not signed the Kyoto Protocol till now, if you're aware about. So, in coming back to our country, this is a guy from Tamil Nadu, one of the person who has redefined forestry and wildlife and environment in this country. He's called Thirumalpad Godavarman, in the Nilgiri mountains, and he went to the court some time back and for a small case of forest being ruined in the Nilgiris, if I can say so. So he filed a writ petition. Finally, after losing and winning in session court and Chennai High Court and so on and so forth, he went to the Supreme Court. So this case, sorry to bore people who are not interested in law, but very important to understand. I'll not go into details. This case is called the Godavarman case, 1996. And this is the biggest case in the world. 5,000 cases of forest, wildlife, environment are tackled in this single case. And this is the case, if you have heard Constitution, called mandamus. Largest amount of mandamus have been issued in this case. And this is the only case in Supreme Court that is listed on a prefixed date and time. Otherwise, dates are announced in a court. So this is listed every Friday at 2 p.m. in the Court of Chief Justice of India, every Friday. And if you have heard about all the cases, whether you heard about a mining case, I'll not name them, in Andhra Pradesh or in Goa or in Odisha, they all have bought from Godavari, including the definition of the word forest. Yeah, the court, once listening to the various submissions made by the defense counsels or the lawyers, told what is the meaning of the word forest, and they realized Indian Forest Act doesn't define the word forest. And the court told the forest would have Oxford Dictionary meaning. That expanded forestry in this country, because I'll not go into that, but Supreme Court has played such a critical and such an important role in expanding, particularly in this case, originating from the state of Tamil Nadu. 1996, PESA, Panchayat Extension to Scheduled Areas Act, first attempt to decentralize forest governance in scheduled areas, did not take off much. 2002, separate Ministry of Ayush, setting up of the National Medicinal Plant Board. Medicinal plants suddenly become so critical to have a board of its own in the Government of India in Delhi. 2002 is my favorite currently for last 4 years, is Biological Diversity Act 2002. And this was under Article 253 of the Constitution, while wildlife was under 252. And this is as per the commitment in CBD. So India signed and ratified the Convention on Biological Diversity, came back to the country, took 10 years, had all the consultations and made a Biological Diversity Act 2002. Very important act. I'll not elaborate on this because of the limitation of time. I would have loved to do that. But this is one act that I'm looking forward to, because it says that every local body in the country, every panchayat, every taluka, every block would have a biodiversity management committee. Will have their own biodiversity management committee. They'll make their own people's biodiversity register. They will not allow a blade of grass to move from their panchayat area or the local body area before extracting the access and benefit sharing, or without giving permission. So National Biodiversity Authority of Chennai or the state biodiversity boards in 29 states would have to get consultation and yes from the local biodiversity committee to allow any biological resource to be utilized for commercial purposes. Or if you're a foreigner, even for research or biosurvey, Indians are allowed to do biological research. That is very brief submission on Biological Diversity Act. 2006 is the National Environment Policy. Then 2006, suddenly people realized Sariska and Ranthambore has no tigers. All the tigers have just disappeared overnight. And then the Wildlife Protection Act was amended, and you had special bodies, very important bodies doing extremely good work now. The National Wildlife Crime Control Bureau with its regional offices, and the National Tiger Conservation Authority was set up in 2006. So state again react, 72 is the Wildlife Protection Act. The realization wildlife has gone down. 2006, 72 onwards, 40 years later, you again come back and say, this is again a problem. And that is what I want to talk about, that this is a problem that will keep on reoccurring. So 2006 is a bottom-up act, which is not borrowing from the Constitution or International Convention, called the Scheduled Tribes and Other Traditional Forest Dwellers Recognition of Forest Rights Act, which lays the plinth on historical injustice to the tribal population or the forest dwellers. And that is what this act is trying to rectify. Some of the hardcore wildlifer would not agree with this act, but that is an act to try to have a consonance with tribal's requirement and the requirements of the tiger, both together. So that is what this act looks like. Prima facie, and implementation, it may be wrong or right. We will not get into the debate today. So I know it is a long monologue that I'm indulging into. I am not able to see the participants, but I hope I'm able to connect to all of you. But I'll keep going ahead in the time given to me. I know I'm speaking fast, which normally I don't do, but that is because I have some ground to cover in the limited time given to me by the Biodiversity Conservation Foundation. So 2010 is the National Green Tribunal Act. And believe me, this is one of the few countries in the world to have its own National Green Tribunal. Not many countries have Green Tribunal, and just to have expeditious disposal of matters related to environment conservation and wildlife. We have a tribunal, and you heard this tribunal being more than proactive and delivering justice in the matters of environment, although through the channels of environment. But last act that has come up is called the Compensatory Afforestation Fund Act of 2016. If you heard about a word called CAMPA Fund and so on and so forth, it comes in 2016. This is also originates in the Supreme Court orders. Because the Supreme Court invented a term, if I can say so, invented a term, and I don't commit a contempt of the Honorable Supreme Court, is a term called net present value. So if you want to destroy this forest today and make a hydropower project or make a school or a college, then you'll have to calculate how much this forest would have given to you if you know economics for next 100 years. and discount that today and calculate, and that comes to around 6 to 10 lakh rupees per hectare that the project proponent has to deposit in the Campa fund, which is not provided in the Forest Conservation Act, which is not provided in any statute, which is possible only because of a judgment of the Honorable Supreme Court of India. So I'll now go towards the present and try to be more into. So I've covered journey till 2016. The present will be more my personal take on what is going and what are the main problems and what could be the main solutions possible. So if I go into the present, I can't start the present without showing this beautiful city. And in offline platforms, I have been using this city, and I love to talk about this city. This city, if you can, anybody can guess, but I don't. I know all of you are muted. So this city is the city of Wuhan. Wuhan in China, the famous city of Wuhan. And at times I ask participants, the left portion is the mountains in the city of Wuhan, and the wet market is here. If you heard about the wet market, it is located here. And this is the urban growth in the city of Wuhan and all these cities in China. So a lot of you would be staying in some of these multi-story apartments in Bangalore or Pune and Hyderabad. And I don't want to name the city, or Chennai or Calcutta or Delhi or Gurugram or Noida. But that is what we call development. That is what we call development. And this right side picture, if we call it development, and if you want to buy 2100 square feet flat in this apartment complex by hook or crook before you retire, I think you're contributing to the GDP of this country. But please remember the slide that I showed in the first instance. All this cement put in these buildings come from the limestone mines in mountains. All the iron rods that have gone into these buildings, these apartments, come from the iron ore mines of Odisha, all the steel plants, Bokaro steel plant, Bhilai steel plant, Rourkela steel plant, Salem is a slight aberration towards Tamil Nadu, but all the other steel plants are located in one pocket. So you please remember, and if you want to not get carried over by emotions of forest and environment conservation, please remember, when you're making this city could be is right of Wuhan, but it could be Bangalore or Pune or any other city or Chennai. And all of them look like this. Earlier, when you used to travel in the country, every city used to have a different flavor. You can smell different things and you can tell the city when you enter a city. But now you can't say in India because all of them look like this from outside. So these urban setups, urban areas have caused a lot of problems to forest and wildlife. So I'm sorry for causing that discomfort to the urbaners here in this forum. But please remember, when you want water in this building, the water comes from nearby. 24 districts around Bangalore have totally dried up because of the water supply to be given to the city of Bangalore. So you cause a lot of water to come into your house. You want all the electricity in the world to come into your house and the air conditioning thereof. And you want all the cement to come into the cities. You want all the iron ore to come into the city. And if you want all that to happen, and all of them calculated together becomes 8% or 9% GDP, then if you want to do all this, I think the stakes in Kanha or Pench or Bandhavgarh, if you want to take a weekend trip and go there and do a wildlife safari in the morning and look at a tiger and come back, I think you're doing, not weighing the both sides of the coin equally. So there's a lot of imbalance. That's the local captive power plant of Wuhan. I'll not go into the story of Wuhan, but yes, this is what our city looks. This is what our country looks. This is the present. This is the present. And in spite of the best efforts of the government, all of us together, government and NGOs and students and researchers and academicians and civil society have tried to solve this problem. But go around, after this webinar, go around for a walk in your city and go to a nearest stream or a lake. If you don't find something like this, you are in the right place. But normally, if you travel through, I love driving through trains, traveling through trains. The moment you enter an urban area, you can find out that urban area is coming by the amount of plastic bags on the railway tracks. Lagta hai koi shehar aane wala hai. So this is our reality. This is what we have done to our natural resource. And all of us, don't blame somebody that he's making uncle chips or he's making Bisleri bottle and so on and so forth. But all of us together have contributed to this mess that we have done to River Ganges. I wrote the detailed project report on Ganga in the last posting. And I had the chance to travel across the Ganga from the origin to almost the end of Ganga Sagar and went to all the 5 states where Ganga flows. Now they're writing DPR for all these, Infant Kabari and Godavari also having a project report now. But it's such a difficult task to imagine. And we talk about solid waste management and we talk about, things like programs of the government. Every day you have some programs saying that Swachhata Bharat Abhiyan and so on and so forth is doing the job, but the problem is enormous. And this is what we have all contributed. You can't blame somebody sitting here. We all have contributed to this. We should not deny that. This is so important. I brought this slide just before I was coming to this presentation because this has become so rampant now. Mountains, Uttarakhand, they have started burning. We had a huge fire in Orissa. We had a fire in Nagaland, which is very, very, very rare to get, but a huge fire in Nagaland. In the Tiger Reserve, we had a huge fire. So forest fires are going to be a huge problem now, particularly the season we are hitting into. If you want to know about present, I think present is today's paper. So today's paper, this is from 21st March, Times of India. I was reading this paper in the morning, and I found these headings, and they actually indicate towards this topic. Study on declining sparrow population urgently needed. Sparrows, they have died because of so many factors that the humans have caused. I would not like to name them. You must have heard about them yesterday. Over 100 leopards hiding in Bijnor sugarcane fields. Looks like somebody who has gone out of prison and is trying to escape as a robber and hiding in the fields. Statement is amazing. And this is in Times of India. This is not some local vernacular newspaper. Over 100 leopards hiding in the Bijnor's sugarcane fields. Sighting on farms have gone up to 20 a month in breeding season. So this is today's newspaper. How present can you apart from today's newspaper? Yesterday, on the last Thursday, 11th, I saw a similar page. I love these pages because they have different messages, different news items, but they all connect. And they connect to the topic we're talking about today. Another stretch of Shivalik diverted for parking lot. The Shivalik is a huge Sal area, mountain area, forest area. A lot of elephants live here. So Forest Department also opposed to the plan. High Court issues notice to the state. So forest area being diverted for parking lot, being diverted for expansion of airports because you want to travel faster, safer, largest planes possible, more tourism. Right side, it is duty of the state to improve people's living standard. The same High Court. And there is no notice issued that the requirement to improve the living standards of people. This is talking about one Gujars who are pastoral communities living in the same Rajaji National Park, same belt where parking lot is coming up, where the one Gujars are living. The High Court saying, please improve their standards of living. Please don't divert land for parking. Please give land for expansion of the airport. And the lower one is very interesting. So that connects my, I saw this picture. I did not know that this opportunity is coming, but I thought this is important. I preserve this kind of things. High Court orders probe into sale of riverbed. So water is connected, wildlife is connected, forest connected. High Court is doing, I will be committing, I think Dantal High Court or the Uttarakhand High Court would be calling me tomorrow for appearing before them. But this is what it looks like. 3 different orders on 3 different natural resources on 3 different directions. So please remember this slide. I thought you'll bring the present straight away. But what are the realities of natural resource management currently? We have done what we have done in the upper portion of the picture, and we are lying there because we have done that. So zoonotic diseases are going to be a reality. God forbid, none of the participants would be lying like this, or any of the relatives have faced this problem, because this is a reality. And all of you, so everybody knows somebody who has gone through this problem. And this problem is because of the upper problem. Somebody was telling me, if a Chinese, if a 55-year-old Chinese ate or drank half-cooked soup made of bat or pangolin, they are not sure about which animal, the whole world is going through a problem. Whole world is going through a problem. And please believe me, zoonotic diseases are going to be more and more recurrent. This is COVID-19, you will have COVID-23 or whatever other name. But please remember, this is going to be a reality. If we don't stop doing the upper portion of the picture, reality, the lower portion is bound to happen. And this is the present of natural resource management. So some of the important words, all of them are full lectures, but just to flag, global warming, climate change is extremely important to understand. I have worked in the mountains. I know about the depleting glaciers from these satellites. I don't bring those slides today because of the limitation of time and the wide topic that was given, but global warming is a reality. Glaciers are declining at a very rapid pace. Things that you saw in Kedarnath tragedy or the tragedy that happened last month in the Uttarakhand mountains of a river lake outflow would be more and more recurrent. 233 lakes sitting in the Beas Valley, where some of you would be going for tourism or travel, but all the mountain tops are full of, they are called GLOF, glacial lake outflows.
So we have done that damage. Global warming, climate change is a reality. You can't deny this. 1 month later, it was the mountains above used to have snow. When I came today to the office, it was blaring hot. So there is something that has gone wrong. Deforestation is so critical. Brazil, Indonesia, India. Species extinction. By the time, I always say, by the time you finish this one day's presentation, today's presentation, 150 species would have gone from this planet. Wildlife poaching is rampant. Is so difficult to handle now. Excessive grazing. Cattle is low productivity. Pasture is also low productivity. Both of them together become a huge problem. Forest fire. I call it home burning. Because July, August, monsoon period in India is a time when all the wild animals give birth to the young ones, whether via the egg route or directly as young borns. But when you have forest fires in the month of April or May or June, when all the birds in this campus now, which I know of, are rearing the young ones, because food becomes abundant in the monsoon period. Everything is available in plenty. Vegetation is in plenty, insects are in plenty, and so on and so forth. Forest fire is not forest fire. Forest fire is actually home burning for flora. From mountains, all the pheasants breed on the ground. All the pheasants, Monal, Western Tragapan, they all breed on the ground. They're all breeders of the ground. So you actually kill all those young ones when you are having forest fire. So very important, very important. It is becoming so recklessly true. Encroachments on land. Land is the only limiting factor, I say. Land, pure water, and intelligence or common sense might be the three limiting factors that human beings have. Country has limited land. So many nautical miles inside the sea, nothing beyond. So encroachment is important. Large population. I want to divert forest land for agriculture, horticulture, make a house, make a resort. Would happen. Forest department would have to tackle that. But encroachment is a reality, would be a reality in the present, also in the future. And forest land would be diverted for encroachment. So I don't deny that. In spite of the best law enforcement, you will not be able to tackle this. Mining, I just told you, GDP growth. Air and water pollution, very critical in some of the areas on the country. We are the most polluted urban areas in the world. You heard those figures. I've just shown a slide of hazardous waste and solid waste. Urbanization is very important. Look at the growth trajectory of urban area in the country. I just brought this graph. Normally, I don't like graphs. But I love this graph because this proves my point of view that orange is Asia. I could talk about urbanization because I'm doing a lot of study now on urbanization and the impact on national parks. Apart from the largest camera possible or the largest zoom lens market of Nikon that happens because of urban areas. But apart from that, this orange is so critical. Everybody wants to migrate to the city and live in a city. And Europe has already done that. Look at Europe, that is green, consistently urban. Since 1950, scientific revolution, industrial revolution happened a long time back. So green has been consistent. North America has been consistent. What is growing is Latin America, Africa, and look at the growth of Asia. So this will cause all those demands. So please don't be deprived of the information that if urban area is growing or if your best airports have been constructed, you are actually contributing to ruining the tiger reserves. The word called compensatory afforestation or net present value, you can't plant trees and make them natural forest. You can increase forest cover, but not really the natural forest cover that should come up. Anyway, so I'll avoid this slide because this will go into complications of what is the problem with forest management in the country. All of them are important things to discuss, but I'll move ahead. So this slide, the only slide I will avoid. So this is what I feel like. As a forest manager, I feel like this. All the forest managers feel like this because they are supposed to be the no-no department. I have batchmates in the other government services, including administration, police, revenue, railways. So I always tell them, my job looks like this. You're supposed to be saying no to everything. I want to make a railway line. No, it is not possible. I want to make a national highway with 4-lane or 8-lane because I want to drive from Coimbatore to Chennai in 2 hours or 1 hour. I don't know what the distance difference time currently takes. But I want to do that. And the forester will say, no, it is not possible because you have to cut trees and I'm not allowed to cut trees. That is what the job is like. And then you have to meet the requirement of the tiger. You have to conserve them. The population goes down. You lose your job. You also have to take care of the livelihood requirement of the tribals living in the forest villages or the forest fringe villages. So this is what forest management looks like without going into that long discourse of those bullet points that I showed in the earlier slide. Now, a bit of economics to trouble you, but at times I try to find out why it is difficult to manage forest as a forest. Why it is so difficult to manage forest as a forest. And the only thing that comes to my mind is economics. If you heard about these words, transaction and opportunity cost of collectively managing forest is often very high. Opportunity cost is when I'm giving this lecture, I'm not relaxing at home or not going cycling, which I love to do, or playing badminton or going to watch a movie. So that is called the opportunity cost. So if I do something, I don't do lot of other things, and that is called the cost, because there is a cost on what I'm doing right now. And that is quite high to maintain forest as a forest. The opportunity cost is very high, because if you cut the forest, you get all the timber, you can convert that forest land into the beautiful city of Noida or into a golf course, and which will give you higher returns. Agriculture gives you higher return. So that is very important to understand if you want to understand forest in the country from economic perspective. So the economic return from alternative use of forest land such as mining or horticulture are high and are increasing. The other problem with, we keep saying that forest gives water, forest gives sunshine, forest gives so on and so forth. So tangibles calculation are very fuzzy. Timber, how much fuel wood comes out of the forest in a country? How much fodder? How much medicinal plant? Very difficult. Things that you can touch are called tangibles. Intangibles, impossible to measure. Very fuzzy calculations. People have tried doing ecosystem services is a new term, and the term is called payment for ecosystem services, PES. But very difficult to. If you look at a forest in Shimla or look at a beautiful forest in Chennai, how much cost will give to look at the forest and the aesthetic value that you get from that? You can't measure aesthetics and the well-being of looking at a lake or a forest and walking around a lake or a forest. So that is called intangible. Watershed, carbon sequestration, oxygen, biodiversity conservation, pollination services, microclimate, very important, very difficult to do. So you can't calculate in crores or billions or millions of dollars that this is what the forest or wildlife gives to you. So at times I say, when you conserve tiger, if the tiger population is 115 kmtr or in Periyar, you're actually conserving all this stuff, all the tangibles down below and all the intangibles that I'm showing in this slide. So it's not only tiger conservation, it is conservation of the last pollination services also. Because if you conserve the tiger, you conserve everything down below. You conserve water. You get rivers full of water because you have a tiger reserve. So that's simply saying that why you should conserve tiger. I'll forget this. This is an act that I love to talk about, but I'll not do it today. This very important phenomena. I'll just talk about the 8 core strengths of the Biological Diversity Act and move ahead. It talks about sovereign right. Biodiversity of KMTR belongs to India and belongs to the state of Tamil Nadu and belongs to the local panchayat or local body or taluka, as you call in Tamil Nadu. It doesn't belong to Brazil. It doesn't belong to Germany. It doesn't belong to USA. That is the sovereign rights. Every country has a sovereign right. Every state has a sovereign right. So center, state, local body. Biological resource, there's a very wide definition of the Biological Diversity Act. Forest Act and Wildlife Act is not that wide. Patenting is controlled. You can't do patenting over biological resource of this country without the prior approval of the National Biodiversity Authority at Chennai. Statutory bodies have been created. This act believes in decentralization. I told Biodiversity Management Committee at local body level, mandatory prior consultation, and they can levy any charge without asking the National Biodiversity Authority or the State Biodiversity Board or the district collector or the DFO. That's the power if it takes over. And it is happening because of the NGT order in a case called Chandrabhal Singh versus Union of India. They forced all the states to make all the BMC committees and PBRs. There's a lot of inventarization of biological resource knowledge and also the traditional knowledge in a PBR, People's Biodiversity Registry. 7th is very important. If I earn as a biodiversity, I was member secretary biodiversity board for 3 years in Himachal Pradesh. If I earn 100 rupees from Dabur or Patanjali or any company, Himalaya or Batik, I will have to give 95% to the local villager. I can keep only 5% for my administrative expenses. So all the money from saving biological resource or somebody mints money on biological resource goes back to the local community. That is the importance of this act. There's a penalty differentiation. So if you are a foreigner doing a crime in this country, you will go behind bars for 5 years and 10 lakh rupees fine. If you're an Indian, you will survive with only 3 years and 5 lakhs. So penalty differentiation, as it's called. Now, this country is normally, I love to use this kind of paradoxical picture. So this country is the upper one, when you worship trees, you tie threads to trees and worship them on particular days, and people tree or bargat tree or I don't know what trees worship in all the states of the country. There's a book called Worship Trees of India. So NRM utilization for sustainable development, that is what you want to do. Natural resource management is perfectly fine, but you want to have sustainable development, the word that I find very difficult to understand. It's a part of understanding that I should take so much from the past and give so much to the present, use so much in the present and give so much to the future. But it's very difficult because you want to be a country of the upper picture, but you also want to become a country of the lower picture. You want to dig all this mines And having a balance between both of them would actually mean the word sustainable development. And it's extremely difficult to do on the field realities position. And that is what my duty is to share with you. Easier said than done. It is not about classical. When I was studying botany in Delhi University, in BSc and MSc, I used to think sustainable development means so on and so forth. You take care of the environment, EIA, EMP, CAT plan, this plan. But it is extremely difficult because this is not, this area can't be replicated into this area. This has lost, this is gone. In spite of the best eco-restoration measure, you might be able to do it, but at how many locations? And the cost because of this is enormous. So on an easier understanding, that central triangle where the red line and the black line and the yellow green line cuts is the area of sustainable development. I don't know how to achieve that. Because if you would want to make the economy grow high, you want the black circle to grow, become bigger. And that will cost the ecology, that will also cost the sociology. And that will change sociology, that will have impact on the ecology. So that triangle is so easy to define as per the Brundtland Commission, but so difficult to achieve, particularly in a high biotic pressure country like ours. This is a slide that I have loved to talk about in recent times, that I blame my biology teachers for teaching me food chain wrong in the left side. They taught me food chain looks like the left one, but actually food chain looks like the right slide, which I realized everything should meet the human being's requirement. Everything else is peripheral, subservient to the great species called humans. So towards the end, I think I have 3 or 4 more slides to go. I'll go into this classical work on tragedy of commons. So I'm trying to find out why this is happening. We understand it is population. We understand it is GDP. We understand it is urbanization. We understand it is our reckless behavior of throwing polythene bag and using polythene bag and asking for a polythene bag from the village, from the local vegetable vendor. So the first one is called critical. Individual lack of concern for the environment. Talking is fine. When you go ahead, you waste water, you waste electricity, you use all the polythene, you waste resources, you use all the fossil fuels. So there's an individual lack of concern for the environment. There are negative externalities of private choices and profit-making firms. I always used to wonder in the mountains when I was working in the Himachal Pradesh, I used to say, why you throw muck into the rivers? Why all the muck dumping or soil dumping from hydropower projects or making a road goes into the river? When I have given you land to make a muck dumping site very nearby, 1 kilometer down the mountain, you please go and dump there properly. Why are you dumping in the river? And the local contractors used to tell me, this is cheap. If I take out muck here, a truck throws into the river, it is cheaper. If I have to travel, I have to waste diesel and the cost is additional. So there is negative externality of private choices and profit-making firms. Strategies of the powerful actors, I will not go into this. This might cost me my job. Consumerism has run amok. We don't want to do intergenerational equity for sure. We are a generation of free riders. Our life should be comfortable. Who has bothered about the life of the children or the grandchildren? So intergenerational equity is a myth, almost like sustainable development. Free market ideology also blocks solutions. This is sounding a bit leftist, but that is true. And the last one is what I feel personally. It is individual interest versus community interest. So when I want to make a house or when I want to live my life, I want to live comfortably. But when I want to talk about community, I think I can have a different opinion. Across the world and also in India, there are 3 mainstream political positions people take. This is the only slide which is congested. Normally I don't make congested slide, but I thought I'll bring all 3 together for your better understanding and then close my presentation. So the mainstream people who recognize the crisis and attempt to develop governmental and international policy to deal with the crisis. And these are the people who recognize the crisis and attempt to develop governmental and international policies to deal with crisis. That is one. That is called the mainstream political position that you can take. Now, if you can look at the other position, that is what I call the right-wing position. There could be only 3 positions you can take. And this is almost, I'm going towards the end of my presentation in next 3 or 4 slides. So one is called the mainstream ideology. That is about the crisis and the attempt to develop governmental and international policies. And the right-wing ideology would be the problem have natural, not human origin. The right-wing people will say these problems have been there for years. It is like saying Jurassic Park also happened on this world. We have not seen dinosaurs. So what is the problem? The Earth has gone through much more. Earth has gone through ice age. So I should use all the fossil fuels, live my life happily. They are not of human origin. They are of all natural. Human factor is insignificant. Increased government regulation will damage the economy. And that is what a lot of people think about. And that is what I will not share my thoughts on that platform, but That is what is happening. Greater market freedom will help deal with ecological problems. Demand and supply curve, when it hits at a particular place, determines the price, and that should be the only free economy possible in the world. It's called a right-wing view. The left-wing view would be guys like, I don't know where I belong to, but I belong somewhere in the middle. The existing global capitalist system is the main cause of the crisis. And the main obstacle, as I've been talking about, when I was talking about urbanization as a problem, I talk about leftist ideologies. And the main obstacle to effective solutions. Unless the fundamental logic of capitalism is challenged, the environmental crisis will only get worse. This last line may be true. And I am not sure about taking either of the approach. I leave it to the audience to choose their own approach. You can just be mainstream and lie there. I call it Buddha's middle path. So you're not troubled by happiness, you're not troubled by sadness, you're just hanging there, ultimate. But you can also take a right-wing view or a left-wing view. But I will try to end with Sachs' statement: the world will no longer be divided by the ideologies of left and right. That is not the choice anymore, but by those who accept ecological limits and who don't. So among the audience, there will be a lot of people who will say there is no ecological limit. I can enjoy all the pleasures of this earth and use all the biological resources, including air, water, fossil fuels, whatever you want to use, electricity, and nothing will matter. And those who don't, and people who actually accept the ecological limits, my talk would be limited to that extent that we should all understand is what I want to, if I am doing a preaching, I was sharing my thoughts, but we should all now, at least after this corona stuff and 2 lockdowns, we should accept our ecological limits as a species and try to reconnect with the other. So the prescription would be, we'll have to reimagine our relationship with nature. Very important to do. We have to start reimagining our relationship with nature and connect more. We can't disconnect more from nature. No, it is supreme. One RNA is doing all the trick. Forget about all the other species that we have made go from this planet. Billions of species, millions of species just disappear from the planet by impact of this great species. So we have to reimagine our relationship with nature. We might be supreme. We might be able to do a lot of things, but I think that supremacy has been challenged in the last 1 year. Exactly 1 year we have completed, and the graph of corona has started rising. So that supremacy is under challenge. Forest governance is a business of all. It is not only forest department or the forest guard. The first slide I started with, that forest guard trying to walk in the mountains with me. It is not a governance setup only for the forest department. The business of all is very important. Government is only a public trustee, so that people don't extract beyond a particular perspective. Within the limits of the government, they try to manage, but it is supposed to be a public trustee only. It is important to align the brown laws, if I call them, the road building laws or the rail building laws or the hydropower laws or the thermal power laws or the policies. That alignment of brown and green laws to confirm with the constitutional aspirations is so important to do. And it is time to act now or never is so important. And I think lockdowns are going to be the new normalcy, is my gut feeling. And nature should get such kind of lockdown. We in the government get 15 days earned leave in 6 months. I always say 15 days lockdown should be made mandatory now. You also relax, let the nature also relax, and let nature come back. So lockdowns are going to be the new normalcy. It's time for nature, and it's not time for us anymore. We are at a crossroad, and I think this is a very important slide saying that at times people say, tiger was crossing the road and got killed. At times, I think we should say that truck coming is crossing the tiger's land. That truck is a problem, not the tiger is a problem on the road. If we realize that, I think there is I give you honest to Kshitij Saxena, whose slide it is, whose picture I borrowed, and that is what this country lacks in. We borrow from slides and we don't acknowledge. So he has shot this beautiful picture that defines what I was talking about. We have fragmented habitats, and now we say these are problem area animals. They come to urban areas. Elephants come to urban areas. They damage so on and so forth. And so I think this is a crossroad. I think the tiger is not crossing the road. The road is crossing the tiger's home, is what I will end with. That is what is my last slide. Thanks to Biodiversity Conservation Foundation, thanks to Kumar Guru and his team for giving this opportunity. And this is my email address. You can connect to me at all platforms. I have only limited access to understanding of doing things in the field and coming back and reading them. So my specialization is forest law and environmental law. So biodiversity starts in the distant past, millions of years ago, but it points towards the future, and it is pointing towards the future. I borrow this from Transatlantic, the International Day for Biological Diversity. Thank you so much for a patient hearing.
Thank you, Kunalji. Thanks for your wonderful presentations and narrations about our past and present management in the Indian forest, especially our natural resources. Thanks for all the participants who have joined today BCF India International webinar. First of all, I would like to thank our Kunal Satyarthi is accepting our invitations also. Thanks, Kunalji, for your wonderful time spending with us. Thank you so much. Thank you all.